Vinyl community, welcome back. I have a very exciting episode for you today. I recently bought a large collection of vintage reggae records. These are not reissues. They are from a sound system collection, a partial collection, that was based in the UK, a sound called Quaker Sound. Now, I've talked a bit about the sound systems in previous videos, how they would be mobile discos that would set up where people that would hold dances where people could go and have a drink and relax and unwind after a hard week and listen to music. A lot of times music they wouldn't hear anywhere else. And of course these sounds had their big collection of records that they would play. So not too often one of these collections comes to market. I have bought these before, but not for a good few years, since before I joined the VC. So I'm very excited to share this haul with you. It's almost 100 records, all singles, no LPs. I'm going to start with the 7-inch singles. Sort of organized them chronologically. As I was going through them, I noticed they went back a lot further than I was expecting, right to the very beginnings of the Jamaican recording industry. So what you have here is a mix of Jamaican pressings, the odd American pressing, and some UK pressings where they would put out records that were licensed from producers in Jamaica. So we're going to start right off with the famous Blue Beat label, which is pretty well known. There's a lot of titles on this label. Blue Beat. This is Fat Man by Derek Morgan. Derek Morgan was one of the bigger hit makers of Jamaican music in the 1960s. This was apparently his first biggest hit in the kind of very early pre-ska R&B style, 1960 on this one. This apparently earned him a bit of a rebuke from Duke Reid, the famous producer, who sent some of his guys around to bring Derek Morgan in and have a little chat with him about recording for anybody else. Further hit for Morgan, Be Still, from a couple of years later, into the ska style by now. The Full Flowering of Ska, 1963. This is Hallelujah by the Vikings. This is actually on a very early island label, long before they were well known for groups like King Crimson and Traffic. Island Records started out pressing Jamaican records for the UK market. So this is a very early Island Records label. The Vikings were actually Toots and the Maytals, or just the Maytals as they were known then. 1963 on that one. Bagaboo, Laurel Aitken on the Giant label, 1964. Laurel Aitken was pretty well known for the kind of in the late 60s skinhead reggae era. Coxsone label, Studio One production, Muriel by Alton and Eddie. Alton was Alton Ellis, later became a pretty big solo star for Studio One and others. UK Parlophone, we're getting up to 1964 here. Don Drummond, or not Don Drummond, Byron Lee and the Dragoneers, Musical Communion. I think Don Drummond did that song as well. This was a bit of a surprise when I looked it up on Discogs. So if I've got the right listing, this has gone for over $100, which I should note, I bought these in bulk. It's kind of, you get what is there, and usually I get a really cheap price on this, a couple of dollars a piece or whatever. And you know, some of these records that's about what they're worth. Others go, there's quite a few that when I look them up on Discogs are in the kind of the $15 to $25 range, and the odd one like that goes a bit more. And it's kind of a mix of well-known classics, some more obscure tunes that turn out to be really good, and you know, some more forgettable ones. But yeah, take what's there. And I consider it kind of an honor and a privilege to own these vintage records that were actually played in these sound system dances at the time. If you could travel back in time, these would be some of the records that you might hear. And it's always a surprise going through them and seeing some that you would expect to see there and others that you've never even heard of, and just kind of interesting. Another Coxsone one, getting into 1967 now, the Rocksteady era. This is the Clarendonians, which featured a very young Freddie McGregor on vocals. He would go on to solo success as well in the 70s and 80s and on up to today, still active. Great hit, another great hit by Derek Morgan, Judge Dredd in Court, popular with the skinheads in England. This is from 1967 as well. This was talking about the Rudeboy phenomena in Jamaica. The Rudeboys were gangs of youths who would be causing trouble at dances and fights and violence. There was kind of two schools of thought among artists that talked about the Rudeboys on records. Some came down on the side of law and order and against the Rudies. Derek Morgan took more of a rebel celebratory stance, celebrating their rebellion. And this was one of them. Tougher Than Tough, which gave its name to the famous Island 4 CD box set, was one of his songs as well, also celebrating the Rudeboys. He had begun singing Rudeboy songs the year before at the request of a well-known Rudeboy named Busby. He did record that song. Busby was pleased with the result and took it to a dance and played it that night. The party got a little out of hand, and Busby sprayed some of his beer on a group of girls who were at the dance. And these girls went home. They were a little bit upset with getting soaked with beer, and the girls were actually associated with a rival Rudeboy gang, and Busby was shot dead the very next day in retaliation. Moving on, this was there was a number of blank records in here, which at least about 5 or 6 of them. I was able to identify all but one of them on my own, which I was a little pleased with myself, with just a minimal bit of research. This is a blank one, just got the Randy's shop stamp on it. It's actually a Duke Reid Treasure Isle production from 1968, and the tune on here is John Holt, billed as Jay and Joya, Joya for Joya Landis, singing I'll Be Lonely, with Tommy McCook and the Supersonics doing an instrumental on the flip. You can see the kind of markings that they would typically have on these kind of records. Another blank on the Splash label, pre-release. That's how these early pressings would come, with no information on it. This was partly desired by the sound systems. They could play these records, and anybody kind of shoulder surfing to see what records they were playing wouldn't be able to see what it was. Sometimes they would scratch out the name too, or cover it over with a felt pen. The exclusivity of tunes was very closely guarded among some of the sound systems. This is actually Lloyd Charmers, who is a member of the Uniques, and as well as a solo artist and producers. Kind of a slack tune called Birth Control, 1969, getting into that kind of skinhead instrumental era. There was a great classic here from Bob Andy, the great singer-songwriter out of Jamaica, one of the greatest songwriters actually. 1970, Feeling Soul. On the Jackpot label, the prolific Bunny Lee producers, one of his many labels. 1971, Double Attack by Lizzie and Delroy Wilson. It's actually a DJ version of Delroy Wilson's hit Cool Operator. Another Jackpot UK pressing from Bunny Lee, the great Slim Smith, Closer Together, backed with Blinded by Love. And you can see the Quaker name across there. They would mark a lot of their records. This was a real nice one right here. Jimmy Cliff, Harder They Come, white label island there. Hugh Roy, otherwise known as U-Roy, Festival Wise, on the Jaguar label. The Faith label, Phil Pratt production. This is Pat Kelly doing Summertime. And the B-side is Gregory Isaacs, All I Have Is Love, one of his very earliest hits. Beautiful record there. Another Derek Morgan, getting up to 1972 here actually. Let Them Talk. Backed with Bringing in the Guns. 1972 on that one. Maytals, Beverly's Records, Leslie Kong production. The very first Bob Marley records were produced by Leslie Kong. It Must Be True Love, 1972. Another Jackpot one. This was one of those blanks I had to try and figure out what it was. And it turns out to be Jackie Brown, Pressure of Babylon, with Tommy McCook on the flip. Still in 1972 on the Wisdom label, Junior Biles, Dada, a very early Lee Perry production there, pre-Black Ark. I'm going to try and move this along pretty quickly. The Bullet label, Lloyd Young. That's actually kind of a DJ tune in the Dennis Al Capone style. And next up we have Dennis Al Capone himself, one of the great early DJs or Jamaican rappers, again on the Jaguar label. One from the Heptones, You've Lost That Lovin' Feeling. That is 1972, a Rupie Edwards production. Hopeton Lewis on the Dragon label, doing Mel and Tim's Starting All Over, which was originally recorded for Stax. Another kind of rude one, The Observers, Wet Panty, instrumental. And the B-side title is actually terrible on here, Discharge Number 2. 90 The Observer, mainly known for his roots and culture productions in that time, but they would dabble in these kind of body salacious tunes as well. This is another blank one, heavily stamped up on the Harry J label, Harry Johnson Productions. You can see it's stamped Record Rama, 41 Barnett Street, Montego Bay. We also repair radios and electronics. There you go. That's a Lorna Bennett tune, as I was able to figure that one out. Lorna Bennett, 1973, Stay With You a While. This is another blank one. No date on this one. I'm guessing it's pretty early 70s as well. On the Twinkle label, which of course leads me to the Twinkle Brothers. This is their label. Norman Grant production, lead singer of the Twinkle Brothers. This is a tune called, what was it called? Stop That Skanking. This is another expensive one. It goes for about 50 or 80 bucks on 50 to 80 on Discogs. The Twinkle Brothers, kind of a goofy name, but they actually evolved into one of the toughest roots reggae outfits of the late 70s. Immigrated to UK and still active today over there. This was a real nice piece in here. Santic label, Leonard Chin production, Pablo and Dub. It's a very early Augustus Pablo single. And this was actually the very first record on the Santic label, apparently. Which was, there's a couple of nice anthologies of that label, which appeared on the Pressure Sounds label, kind of 90s, early 2000s. We'll skip that one. What do we got here? Big Youth on his own Nagusa Nagast label. Again, the Quaker mark on there. I Pray Thee, backed with I Pray Thee Continually. 1973 we're into here. What do we got? Another DJ, another Big Youth one, hard to read there, on the DJ label called Love in the Neighborhood. This was a real classic one. I actually have this on a Jamaican pressing. It is the UK pressing of Larry Marshall, I Admire You. Larry Marshall, not too well known. He's sometimes credited with the very first reggae single for Nanny Goat, one of his late 60s tune. But the flip side is actually kind of the historical one on here. I Admire You is actually a great song. It's the title of one of his albums, which has been reissued. But the B-side, Watergate Rock, King Tubby's. This is the very first record credited to King Tubby by name, doing, of course, the dub version. Ken Parker on the Attack label. A very nice one here as well. Bob Andy, the great singer-songwriter again. Fire Burning. Classic, later memorably covered by Marcia Griffiths in the 90s. Backed with Nyabingi drum version by Dadawa, called Burning Drums on the Wildflower label. Dadawa, better known as Ras Michael of the Sons of Negus, 1974. One of his great, Bob Andy's great socially conscious songs on here. The haves will want to be in the shoes of the have-not. If the sign is on your door, then you'll be safe for sure. But if you're on the wrong side of the fence, if you're in pretense, then you're in the wrong side of the fence. Casey White, I was showing one of his LPs recently. One of his very first singles, first or second I think. Cover of The First Cut Is the Deepest. I think this one is a Canadian pressing if I looked it up correctly. 1974 on that one as well. Johnny Clark, very prolific hit maker for Bunny Lee, the great producer of the 70s. Leave Babylon on the Justice label. I Roy with Rasta Pickney on the B-side. Ansel Collins, Atlantic One on the Gigi's label. I actually have that on an American pressing on Impact as well. UK Attack label, Count Prince Miller, The Monkey. One's new to me. Dandy Livingston production apparently. Another kind of obscure one, Jackie Brown, Lionhead. It's on the same rhythm as Desmond Decker's Israelites actually. Another, you can see in the sound systems how they would kind of blank out the name so you couldn't tell what the record was. This is another Johnny Clark one, Bunny Lee production. It's his cover of If You Should Lose Me. Who did that originally? Name escapes me right now. Many cover versions of that. 1975. These singles were always great for the dub versions. Here you've got Straight to Edward's Head by King Tubby and the Aggravators. King Tubby always pulled out all the bells and whistles for his dub versions for the Johnny Clark stuff. Delroy Wilson on the Dip label. Clock Tower label. U-Roy on Crystal. Penny for Your Dub. Derek Harriott production there. Obscure one to me, Righteous Foundation Band, Praise Without Raise on Soul Prof label. Excuse me. Another obscure one, what is it called? Veronica Adams, Believe What You See on the Locks label. Apparently there's the UK press with, this has been punched out, but it's got the Dread's face right in there. Last few 7 inches. Jackie Edwards doing Bob Marley's I'm Still Waiting. You can see the Quaker mark there. Another Bunny Lee production. He would be kind of sneaky and do a couple of Bob Marley covers like this. And Bob Marley did not take kindly to that. Dennis Brown, One Way Street on the Observer label. 90 the Observer production. Very well known for his work with Dennis Brown. Helped put him on the path to superstardom. Lionel and Keith, Where Did He Go on Savoy's label. This was one that was kind of obscure. I had to listen to it, and it's actually a song kind of talking about the passing of Haile Selassie, the Emperor of Ethiopia, who was worshipped as a deity by the Rastafarians, and when he was overthrown by Marxist rebels and put them in kind of a disarray, despair. So that's talking about Where Did He Go. Ronnie Davis, great reggae singer, just passed away very recently. No One. Actually had this single in my hand the day before I heard the news he'd died. Big Youth, 6 Dead, 19 Gone to Jail on the Observer label. This is his comment on the Green Bay Massacre, which was a politically charged killing that happened in Jamaica in the late 70s. And several more singles. Tribesman, that's a UK label. We got a Joe Gibbs label, that is Prince Jazzbo, going up to 1980 here. And there's a few more singles. There were some 90s ones. Sugar Minot, Run Things on the Exterminator label, which was a great, bringing it back to the roots and culture of the 70s, bringing it up to date in the 1990s. So I'm going to stop right here now, guys, and I'll do a part 2 with the 12-inch singles, which there's a smaller number of, but I don't want this video to get too long, so thanks for tuning in, guys, and take care.